will let slip some truth about themselves, or they will put on a mask that you, in the laboratory situation you have created, will be able to peer behind. A critical part of understanding people is gauging their powers of resistance. Without that knowledge, you will either over or underestimate them, depending on your own levels of fear and confidence. You need to know how much fight people have in them. Someone hiding his cowardice and lack of resolve can be made to surrender with a single violent push. Someone desperate, who has little to lose, will fight to the bitter end. The Mongols used to begin their campaigns with a battle whose only purpose was to test their opponent's strength and resolve. They would never deal with an enemy until they had gauged his morale. This set-up battle also had the benefit of revealing something of his strategy and thought. The quality of the information you gather on your enemies is more important than the quantity. A single but crucial nugget can be the key to their destruction. When the Carthaginian general Hannibal saw that the Roman general he was facing was arrogant and hot-tempered, he would deliberately play weak, luring the man into a rash attack. Once Churchill saw that Hitler had a paranoid streak, becoming irrational at the merest hint of vulnerability, the Prime Minister knew how to unhinge the German Führer. By feigning to attack some marginal area like the Balkans, he could make him see threats on all sides and spread out his defenses, a critical military mistake. In 1988, Lee Atwater was a political strategist on the team of the senior George Bush, who was then in the race to become that year's Republican presidential nominee. Discovering that Bush's main rival, Senator Robert Dole, had a terrible temper that his aides had to struggle to control, Atwater devised endless stratagems to push Dole's buttons. Not only did an upset Dole look unpresidential to the American public, but an emotional and angry man rarely thinks straight. A disturbed mind is one you can control and unbalance at will. There are, of course, limits to how much intelligence gathering you can achieve by first-hand observation. A network of spies will extend your vision, particularly as you learn to interpret the information they bring you. An informal network is the best, a group of allies recruited over time to be your eyes and ears. Try to make friends with people at or near the source of information on your rival. One well-placed friend will yield far more than will a handful of paid spies. In Napoleon's time, his intelligence network was second to none, but his best information came from friends whom he had carefully positioned in diplomatic circles around Europe. Always look for internal spies, people in the enemy camp who are dissatisfied and have an axe to grind. Turn them to your purposes, and they will give you better information than any infiltrator you sneak in from the outside. Hire people the enemy has fired. They will tell you how the enemy thinks. President Bill Clinton got his best intelligence on the Republicans from his advisor Dick Morris, who had worked for them for years and knew their weaknesses, both personal and organizational. A warning: never rely on one spy, one source of information, no matter how good. You risk being played or getting slanted one-sided information. Many people leave a paper trail of writings, interviews, and so on that is as revealing as anything you can learn from a spy. Well before World War II, Adolf Hitler's book Mein Kampf supplied a blueprint of his thinking and intentions, not to mention endless clues to his psychology. His generals Erwin Rommel and Heinz Guderian also wrote about the new kind of blitzkrieg warfare they were preparing. People reveal a lot about themselves in their writing, partly intentionally — they are out to explain themselves after all — and partly helplessly to the skilled reader between the lines. Finally, the enemy you are dealing with is not an inanimate object that will simply respond in an expected manner to your strategies. Your enemies are constantly changing and adapting to what you are doing. Innovating and inventing on their own, they try to learn from their mistakes and from your successes. So your knowledge of the enemy cannot be static. Keep your intelligence up to date, and do not rely on the enemies responding the same way twice. Defeat is a stern teacher, and your beaten opponent today may be wiser tomorrow. Your strategies must take this possibility into account. Your knowledge of the enemy must be not just deep, but timely. Reversal. Even as you work to know your enemies, you must make yourself as formless and difficult to read as possible. Since people really only have appearances to go on, they can be readily deceived. Act unpredictably now and then. Throw them some golden nugget of your inner self, something fabricated that has nothing to do with who you really are. Be aware that they are scrutinizing you, and either give them nothing or feed them misinformation. Keeping yourself formless and inscrutable will make it impossible for people to defend themselves against you and render the intelligence they gather on you useless. Here are further reflections on the intelligence strategy. By Sun Tzu. He who knows the enemy and himself will never in 100 battles be at risk. From The Art of War, by Niccolo Machiavelli. As to the second case, that of being drawn into a trap or ambush, you must be shrewd about not believing easily things not in accord with reason. For example, if the enemy puts some booty before you, you ought to believe that within it there is a hook, and that it conceals some trick. If many of the enemy are put to flight by your few, if a few of the enemy assail your many, if the enemy turn in sudden flight, you ought to fear a trick. And you should never believe that the enemy does not know how to carry on his affairs. Rather, if you hope to be less deceived and run less risk, in proportion as your enemy is weaker, in proportion as he is less cautious, you should the more respect him. From Aesop's Fables. The Aging Lion and the Fox. A lion who was getting old and could no longer obtain his food by force decided that he must resort to trickery instead. So he retired to a cave and lay down, pretending to be ill. Thus, whenever any animals came to his cave to visit him, he ate them all as they appeared. When many animals had disappeared, a fox figured out what was happening. He went to see the lion, but stood at a safe distance outside the cave and asked him how he was. "Oh, not very well," said the lion, "but why don't you come in?" But the fox said, "I would come inside if I hadn't seen that a lot of footprints are pointing inwards towards your cave, but none are pointing out." Wise men note the indications of dangers and thus avoid them. From Human, All Too Human, by Friedrich Nietzsche. Bait. Everyone has his price. This is not true, but there surely exists for everyone a bait he cannot help taking. Thus, to win many people over to a cause, one needs only to put on it a gloss of philanthropy, nobility, charitableness, self-sacrifice. And unto what cause can one not put it? These are the sweetmeats and dainties for their soul. Others have others. From The Tao of Spycraft, by Ralph D. Sawyer. Confucius's evaluation of Yang Hu, a man who had been forced to flee from one state to another because he proved greedy and disloyal each time he acquired power, provides a simple example of projecting behavior on the basis of constancy. Based upon this repeated behavioral pattern, Confucius accurately predicted that Yang Hu would certainly suffer an ignominious end. More generally, Mencius subsequently stated, "A man who ceases his efforts where he should not will abandon them anywhere. A man who is parsimonious with those with whom he should be generous will be parsimonious everywhere." Granting that people generally acquire fixed habits early in life, A man's end may therefore be foreseen by midlife. Someone who is still disliked at 40 years of age will end by being so. From The Art of Political Warfare by John J. Pitney, Jr. Coordination is less of a problem when political leaders themselves play an active part in the intelligence effort. When he was Senate Majority Leader, Lyndon Johnson cultivated an extensive intelligence system with sources all over Washington. At one point in the 1950s, Johnson complained to a reporter that he was focusing on internal Democratic problems while failing to cover divisions in the Senate GOP. To make his point, he pulled out a memorandum on a recent private meeting at which the reporter and several of his colleagues had gotten a briefing on GOP factionalism from Senator Thurston Morton, the Republican from Kentucky. Roland Evans and Robert Novak recalled, "The intelligence system was a marvel of efficiency. It was also rather frightening." Even in the White House, Johnson believed in first-hand political intelligence. According to his aide, Harry McPherson, "I guess he called a lot of people, but I could usually count on it in the late afternoon as he woke up from his nap, that I would get a call which would usually say, 'What do you know?' McPherson would then pass along the latest news that he picked up from reporters and political figures." From Lives of Master Swordsmen by Makoto Sugawara. In all the martial arts, in all the performing arts, and still more in all the forms of human behavior, a man's postures or moves are based on the movements of his invisible mind. In the Kage style of swordsmanship, a swordsman reads his opponent's mind through his postures or moves. What mind can penetrate his opponent's mind? It is a mind that has been trained and cultivated to the point of detachment, with perfect freedom. It is as clear as a mirror that can reflect the motions within his opponent's mind. When one stands face to face with his opponents, his mind must not be revealed in the form of moves. Instead, his mind should reflect his opponent's mind like water reflecting the moon. Again, from Lives of Master Swordsmen by Makoto Sugawara. When Munenori was granted an audience with the shogun, he sat down, put his hands on the tatami floor, as retainers always did to show their respect to their master. Suddenly, Iemitsu thrust a spear at the unsuspecting Munenori, and was surprised to find himself lying flat on his back. Munenori had sensed the shogun's intention before a move had been made, and swept Iemitsu's legs out from under him at the instant of the thrust. By Miyamoto Musashi. In my opinion, there are two kinds of eyes. One kind simply looks at things, and the other sees through things to perceive their inner nature. The former should not be tense, so as to observe as much as possible. The latter should be strong, so as to discern the workings of the opponent's mind clearly. Sometimes, a man can read another's mind with his eyes. In fencing, it is all right to allow your own eyes to express your will, but never let them reveal your mind. This matter should be considered carefully and studied diligently. From Human, All Too Human by Friedrich Nietzsche. Anger as spy. Anger empties out the soul and brings even its dregs to light. That is why, if we know no other way of discovering the truth of the matter, we must know how to put our acquaintances, our adherents and opponents, into a rage, so as to learn all that is really being thought and undertaken against us. From the Book of Samuel. Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" And he said to him, "Far from it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so. But David replied, Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, Let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. Then said Jonathan to David, Whatever you say I will do for you. David said to Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at table with the king. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family. If he says, Good, it will be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that evil is determined by him. And Jonathan said to David, Come, let us go out into the field. So they both went out into the field. So David hid himself in the field. And when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat upon his seat, as at other times, upon the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, Something has befallen him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. But on the second day, the morrow after the new moon, David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, Why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, Let me go, for our family holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason he has not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame, and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives upon the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and fetch him to me, for he shall surely die. Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, Why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul cast his spear at him to smite him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger, and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had disgraced him. By Friedrich Nietzsche. Motive of attack. One attacks someone not only so as to harm him, or to overpower him, but perhaps only so as to learn how strong he is. From Hagakure, the Book of the Samurai, by Yamamoto Tsunetomo. Last year at a great conference, there was a certain man who explained his dissenting opinion and said he was resolved to kill the conference leader if it was not accepted. His motion was passed. After the procedures were over, the man said, Their assent came quickly. I think they are too weak and unreliable to be counselors to the master. From Warriors, Warfare and the Native American Indian, by Norman Bancroft Hunt. Colonel Joe Cremeny commented on their adeptness at seeming to disappear when he wrote, An Apache can conceal his swart body amidst the green grass, behind brown shrubs or gray rocks, with so much address and judgment that any but the experienced would pass him by without detection at the distance of 3 or 4 yards, and noted that they will watch for days, scanning your every movement, observing your every act, taking exact note of your party and all its belongings. Let no one suppose that these assaults are made upon the spur of the moment, by bands accidentally encountered. Far from it. They are almost invariably the results of long watching, patient waiting, careful and rigorous observation, and anxious counsel. And lastly, from The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. In principle, I should lay it down that the existence of secret agents should not be tolerated, as tending to augment the positive dangers of the evil against which they are used. That the spy will fabricate his information is a commonplace. But in the sphere of political and revolutionary action, relying partly on violence, the professional spy has every facility to fabricate the very facts themselves and will spread the double evil of emulation in one direction and of panic, hasty legislation, unreflecting hate on the other. Chapter 14. Overwhelm resistance with speed and suddenness. The Blitzkrieg strategy. In a world in which many people are indecisive and overly cautious, the use of speed will bring you untold power. Striking first, before your opponents have time to think or prepare, will make them emotional, unbalanced, and prone to error. When you follow with another swift and sudden maneuver, you will induce further panic and confusion. This strategy works best with a setup, a lull. Your unexpected action catches your enemy off guard. When you strike, hit with unrelenting force. Acting with speed and decisiveness will garner you respect, awe, and irresistible momentum. Slow, slow, quick, quick. In 1218, Muhammad II, the Shah of Khwarezm, received a visit from 3 ambassadors on behalf of Genghis Khan, the leader of the Mongol Empire to the east. The visitors bore magnificent gifts, and more important, the offer of a treaty between the two powers that would allow the reopening of the lucrative Silk Road connecting China and Europe. The Shah's empire was immense, incorporating present-day Iran and much of Afghanistan. His capital, Samarkand, was fabulously wealthy, a symbol of his power, and increased trade along the route would only add to these riches. Since the Mongols made it clear they considered him the superior partner in the deal, the Shah decided to sign the treaty. A few months later, a Mongol caravan arrived in the city of Otrar, in the northeastern corner of the Shah's empire, with the mission to buy luxury items for the Mongol court. The governor of Otrar suspected the men in the caravan of being spies. He had them killed, and he seized the goods they had brought to barter. Hearing of this outrage, Genghis Khan dispatched an ambassador, escorted by 2 soldiers, to the Shah, calling for an apology. The demand, which presumed to put the 2 empires on equal footing, incensed the Shah. He had the ambassador's head cut off and sent back to Genghis Khan. This, of course, meant war. The Shah was not afraid. His army, anchored by its well-trained Turkish cavalry, numbered over 400,000, at least twice the enemy's size. By defeating the Mongols in battle, the Shah could finally take over their land. He assumed the Mongols would attack Transoxiana, the easternmost part of the Shah's empire. Bordered to the east by the 500-mile-long Sirdarya River, to the north by the Kizilkum Desert, and the west by the Amudarya River, Transoxiana's interior was also home to 2 of the most important cities of the empire, Samarkand and Bukhara. The Shah decided to establish a cordon of soldiers along the Sirdarya, which the Mongols would have to cross to enter his empire. They could not cross from the north, the desert was impassable, and to go to the south would be too great a detour. Keeping the bulk of his army in the interior of Transoxiana, he would be able to place reinforcements where needed. He had an impregnable defensive position and superiority in numbers. Let the Mongols come. He would crush them. In the summer of 1219, scouts reported that the Mongols were approaching the southern end of the Sirdarya through the Fergana Valley. The Shah sent a large force under the leadership of his son, Jalal ad-Din, to destroy the enemy. After a fierce battle, the Mongols retreated. Jalal ad-Din reported back to his father that the Mongol army was not nearly as fearsome as their reputation. The men looked haggard, their horses emaciated, and they seemed none too eager to sustain a fight. The Shah, believing the Mongols no match for his army, put more troops at the southern end of the cordon and waited. A few months later, a Mongol battalion appeared without warning in the north, attacking the city of Otrar and capturing its governor, the same man responsible for the outrage against the Mongol traders. The Mongols killed him by pouring molten silver into his eyes and ears. Stunned by how quickly they had managed to reach Otrar, and from an unexpected direction, the Shah decided to shift more troops to the north. These barbarians might move swiftly, he reasoned, but they could not overcome an entrenched army with such great numbers. Next, however, two Mongol armies swept south from Otrar, running parallel to the Sirdarya. One, under General Joshi, began to attack key towns along the river, while the other, under General Jebe, disappeared to the south. Like locusts, Joshi's army swarmed through the hills and lowlands near the river. The Shah moved a good portion of his army to the river, keeping some reserves in Samarkand. Joshi's force was relatively small, 20,000 at most. These mobile units hit one position after another without warning, burning forts and wreaking havoc. Reports from the front lines began to give the Shah a picture of these strange warriors from the east. Their army was all cavalry. Each Mongol not only rode a horse, but was trailed by several more riderless horses, all mares, and when his own horse tired, he would mount a fresh one. These horses were light and fast. The Mongols were unencumbered by supply wagons. They carried their food with them, drank the mare's milk and blood, and killed and ate the horses that had become weak. They could travel twice as fast as their enemy. Their marksmanship was extraordinary. Facing forward or in retreat, they could fire arrows with remarkable dexterity, making their attacks far deadlier than anything the Shah's army had ever seen. Their divisions communicated over great distances with flags and torches. Their maneuvers were precisely coordinated and nearly impossible to anticipate. Dealing with this constant harassment exhausted the Shah's forces. Now, suddenly, the army under General Jebe that had disappeared to the south reappeared heading northwest into Transoxiana at remarkable speed. The Shah hurriedly sent south his last reserves, an army of 50,000, to do battle with Jebe. He still was not worried. His men had proved their superiority in direct combat at the battle in the Fergana Valley. This time, however, it was different. The Mongols unleashed strange weapons. Their arrows were dipped in burning tar, which created smoke screens, behind which their lightning-quick horsemen advanced, opening breaches in the lines of the Shah's army through which more heavily armed cavalry would advance. Chariots darted back and forth behind the Mongol lines, bringing up constant supplies. The Mongols filled the sky with arrows, creating relentless pressure. They wore shirts of heavy silk. An arrow that managed to pierce the shirt would rarely reach the flesh and could be extracted easily by pulling at the shirt. All of this done while moving at great speed. Jebe's army annihilated the Shah's forces. The Shah had one option left: retreat to the west, retrench, and slowly rebuild his army. As he began preparations, however, something beyond belief occurred. An army under Genghis Khan himself suddenly stood outside the gates of the city of Bukhara, to the west of Samarkand. Where had they come from? They could not have crossed the Kizilkum Desert to the north. Their appearance seemed all but impossible, as if the devil himself had conjured them up. Bukhara soon fell, and within days Samarkand followed. Soldiers deserted, generals panicked. The Shah, fearing for his life, fled with a handful of soldiers. The Mongols pursued him relentlessly. Months later, on a small island in the Caspian Sea, abandoned by one and all, wearing rags and begging for food, the former ruler of the wealthiest empire in the East finally died of hunger. Interpretation. When Genghis Khan became the leader of the Mongol nation, he inherited perhaps the fastest army on the planet. But their swiftness had translated into limited military success. The Mongols might have perfected the art of fighting on horseback, but they were too undisciplined to exploit any advantage they gained this way or to coordinate for a large-scale attack. The genius of Genghis Khan was to transform the chaotic Mongol speed into something organized, disciplined, and strategic. He achieved this by adapting the ancient Chinese strategy of slow, slow, quick, quick. The first step, slow, was to meticulously prepare before any campaign, which the Mongols always did to the highest degree. In planning for the attack on the Shah, the Mongols learned of a guide who knew of a chain of oases across the Kizilkum Desert. This man was captured and later led Genghis Khan's army across the forbidding territory. The second slow was a setup, which involved getting the enemy to lower its guard, lulling it into complacency. The Mongols, for example, deliberately lost the first battle in the Fergana Valley to feed the Shah's arrogance. Then came the first quick, fixing the enemy's attention forward with a swift frontal attack, Jebe's raids along the river. The final quick was a doubly swift blow from an unexpected direction. Genghis's sudden appearance before the gates of Bukhara is considered by many the greatest military surprise in history. A master of psychological warfare, Genghis Khan understood that men are most terrified by the unknown and unpredictable. The suddenness of his attacks made the speed of them doubly effective, leading to confusion and panic. We live in a world in which speed is prized above almost all else, and acting faster than the other side has itself become the primary goal. But most often people are merely in a hurry, acting and reacting frantically to events, all of which makes them prone to error and wasting time in the long run. In order to separate yourself from the pack, to harness a speed that has devastating force, you must be organized and strategic. First, you prepare yourself before any action, scanning your enemy for weaknesses. Then you find a way to get your opponents to underestimate you, to lower their guard. When you strike unexpectedly, they will freeze up. When you hit again, it is from the side and out of nowhere. It is the unanticipated blow that makes the biggest impact. By Xenophon. The less a thing is foreseen, the more fright does it cause. This is nowhere seen better than in war, where every surprise strikes terror even to those who are much the stronger. Keys to warfare. In May 1940, the German army invaded France and the Low Countries using a new form of warfare, the Blitzkrieg. Advancing with incredible speed, the Germans coordinated tanks and airplanes in an attack that culminated in one of the quickest and most devastating victories in military history. The success of the Blitzkrieg was largely due to the Allies' static, rigid defense, similar to the Shah's defense against the Mongols. When the Germans breached this defense, the Allies could not adjust or react in time. The Germans advanced faster than their enemy could process what was happening. By the time the Allies decided upon a counter-strategy, it was too late. Conditions had changed. They were always a step behind. Now, more than ever, we find ourselves dealing with people who are defensive and cautious, who begin any action from a static position. The reason is simple. The pace of modern life is increasingly growing faster, full of distractions, annoyances, and interruptions. The natural response for many is to retreat inward, to erect psychological walls against the harsh realities of modern life. People hate the feeling of being rushed and are terrified of making a mistake. They unconsciously try to slow things down,